It is up and going. We are at 6:02. So I think at this point in time, we will start things off. So good evening, everyone. My name is John Reiner. I'm the Director of Planning and Development Services for the town of Groton. With me here tonight, number of staff, John Burke, Town Manager, Daniel Cheeseborough from the town of Stonington, and our consultant on this project, John Burke. And this project has been a joint effort of the town of Stonington and the town of Groton. We've been working on this with John for about 9 months. We had a great group of people that were helping us out with this, a number of residents from the downtown Mystic area on both sides of the river, business owners, as well as staff from both of the towns, trying to put our ideas and heads together on this, along with John, who's been doing a lot of this work in municipalities just like ours, really focusing on traffic and transportation in some of these great historic downtown areas. I know John will talk a little bit this afternoon, right now, about his background. And what we're also hoping to do, so there's kind of two ways people are watching this right now. There are participants that were able to register onto the live feed, as well as those that are watching this on YouTube. I believe we'll have a chat box function that will enable out there for people to ask questions. And for those that are watching this on YouTube, I will put something out there. If you want to directly email me at jreiner, REINER, at groton.ct-ct.gov. While we're doing this, we will do our best to answer the questions. John will give a presentation about the parking study that he did, and then we'll have a fair amount of time to answer any questions that people have that would come up. So with that, I will hand it off to you, John, and
okay, great.
We'll go from there.
Thank you, John, and good evening. My name is John Burke. I'm a parking and transportation consultant here in New England. I'm pleased to be with you this evening to present the results of the Downtown Mystic Parking Study. We're going to be looking for input here tonight as well that we'll incorporate in our final report. A little bit about my qualifications. I'm a certified administrator of public parking. I am a professional registered engineer, and I have 30 years experience in the parking and transportation industry. Former city parking and transportation director for a couple of cities is listed there. And the last 12 years, I've had my independent consulting practice here in New England. As John said, I've worked in a number of coastal communities, particularly here in New England. I've listed a number of them here between Rhode Island and Maine. A lot of them dealing with very similar issues, some of them different, and some of them are unique here to Mystic that we'll get into in a minute. Scope of services for the project, there were 10 primary tasks as I've listed here. We are currently on number 9, which is conducting the public presentation. As I said, we're going to bring your input here tonight. We have a draft study report. We're going to incorporate that and then issue a final report to the towns. The study area that we looked at for Mystic is the approximate 5-minute walk zone, and that walk zone is represented by the blue circle. It's about a quarter-mile radius around the downtown. This is typical in small downtown areas like Mystic, where that 5-minute walk zone represents typically more than 90% of your parking sessions on a given day. So, or through the year, and really that comes from many parking planners looking at studies over many years. That's not to say all your trips occur in the 5-minute zone. Certainly on Saturdays in the summer they go outside of that. So we focused our count program in the 5-minute zone, but we certainly looked outside of the 5-minute zone as well. Study Advisory Committee was comprised of the following members put together by the two towns. As you can see, it's important to have department directors involved in the communities who would be responsible and involved with implementing parking planning, but equally important to have, of course, the businesses, the merchant groups, resident folks, and Chamber of Commerce. Those are represented. We also, because it was the pandemic when this was taken, we had to go the extra mile on stakeholder input. And we did an awful lot of interviews. The intent was to reach out first and foremost to users of the system. We want to make sure all these folks are people who use the parking system, are familiar with the parking system, but come at this from different vantage points, whether that be residents or business owners, employees. If we have people who are on commissions here, as you can see, and certainly people will have different views. There were commonalities to a lot of the input we received. We went back to some of these folks 2 and 3 times, depending on what the issues were. But this stakeholder input really informed the advisory committee as they moved through the evaluation of issues with parking. We expanded this group to include the police chiefs. Both police chiefs were interviewed, and went beyond that to include the Mystic Museum of Art executive director, as well as staff, parking staff there, and the Mystic Seaport Museum, as well as your regional transit provider, Southeast Area Transit District. So the guiding principles is really the first step that we often take in these studies, which is to say, what are the values and core principles of each community? These differ from town to town, and we develop these starting with a master list of potential principles and guiding values that the advisory committee then works down through. We used input from the stakeholder group, and essentially our individual advisory committee members ranked and scored each of our principles and came up with 12. There's nothing magical about 12, but that's kind of where the point total fell off. These are the 12 principles. They're in the report. We use them again to assess issues and come back when we're looking at potential solutions. So, the first top 6, you might say, are the highest rated. These are in priority order for the most part. Again, we'll go into this a little bit more as we go along. Our existing conditions, we looked at the parking inventory and regulations. Certainly we're interested in both the on and off street parking system, the public versus the private system, regulated, time regulated, paid versus unregulated. But we wanted to look at parking utilization and see how utilization changes by time of day. What's the weekday look like versus Saturday? How does seasonality affect this coastal community compared to others? What's the turnover in the commercial zone? What's our compliance and things of that nature? We also looked at how we're doing management and enforcement of the system now. And we looked at the parking ordinance, certainly looked at zoning ordinance and how we're requiring parking through development and as well as transit services and multimodal services. So starting with the inventory of regs in that 5-minute zone I talked about, we counted on a couple of days in September, 1,564 total spaces in that zone. We didn't include residential driveways. There are a number of gravel lots that we're just not able to ascertain where zoning required parking could be allowed in those gravel lots, so we did not include those lots. So there is additional parking there. But of the 992 off-street parking spaces we did count, they were only 210 of those privately owned spaces. Off-street are paid public spaces, all being in the Art Museum lot, which is also privately owned. So that's the first key, is that everything off-street is, for the most part, private. On-street, 572 spaces. Of those 125 of the on-street spaces are 2-hour time restricted parking spaces. All on-street spaces are free. When we look, I jumped ahead, sorry. When we look at the parking, we mapped the inventory of regulations. We looked and made sure that we got down all the handicap 2-hour, 15-minute spaces, bridge tender parking, couple of loading zones that exist on either side of the bridge. And as you see there in black, the black really represents their 2-hour zone that's feeding the commercial district. That's your commercial turnover parking. We did our counts, as I say, on Tuesdays in September. We counted every 2 hours from 8 in the morning, really to 9 at night. It says 8 to 8, but that 8 o'clock count ended at 9. So we counted from 8 in the morning till about 9 at night. Saturday, September 19th, Thursday, September 24th. September, typically in a lot of the coastal communities that I work in New England, that ends up being the 3rd busiest month of the year from a parking demand perspective. after July and August. So we used that month. We counted all of our counts occurred on good weather days, and not just good weather. Usually the sun was out and it was quite occupied downtown. We went back and we did what we call spot occupancy counts. I like to do that to confirm the counts that are done by subcontract in September. So I went back on Thursday and recounted and looked at some of the areas that were counted and verified those counts. Thursday, November 5th, Saturday, November 7th. We want to assess seasonality of demand. How do things change as we get in the off season? And we also did a license plate survey to look at parking turnover and compliance with our 2-hour limits. We then took all of that information and we put that on color-coded maps we call heat maps. Those kind of very easily and visually allow the advisory committee to see, okay, here's your areas of overuse of some of your on-street and off-street parking, and here's areas of underuse, and here's areas where you're getting targeted use. And so just spend a minute on that functional capacity. We are going to show in red in the maps that you see momentarily. That's parking that is over 85% use. What we've found doing hundreds and hundreds of studies is that when streets get above 85% use occupied, parkers do not have a reasonable expectation of finding a space on those streets. And what you start to see is sort of a circling and a hunting for parking at that point in time, for parking around that zone. So we call that functional capacity. In lots, it tends to be a little higher, maybe 90% use. What we're calling here for Mystic acceptable use is 60 to 85% use. That would be shown in black. You'll see that in black. That we would say would be parking that's being used, not overused, but not underused. It's in a zone. Most municipalities have a target use where they try to get between 75 and 85% use of all of their facilities in the peak hour. I can tell you no one attains that across the board, but that's a goal generally that we try to use regulation and pricing to make sure we're using all of the supply that we have in an acceptable range. Underutilization is less than 60% use, okay? So that represents an opportunity maybe to shift demand. So here, let's take a look at the weekday conditions as we saw it in September. This is the 2 p.m. peak that day on September 24th. The peak demand occurred at 2 p.m. Only 51% of the total supply was taken. That largely is due because of the amount of private off-street lot spaces that you have that are underutilized. Which is not unusual because it's typically single-use space. I'm only showing parking lots here of 20 spaces and more just for visual for you. It's easier to see. But as you can see here in red, what jumps out at you right away is the 2-hour zone. Much of the 2-hour zone is at functional capacity. In fact, on average, the entire 2-hour zone is above that 85% level. But what you also see is the art museum lot here at the peak of the day on this weekday is not at functional capacity. In fact, it really stays pretty much in the sweet spot of that targeted use, 75 to 85% throughout the peak. And your peaks here really are interesting in that 2, 4, and 6 p.m. If you look at the table at the bottom, total percentage use is very close. So, you know, your peak maybe 2 p.m. one weekday, the next day it might be 4 or 6. So you've got a very tight peak afternoon. And, but what we're seeing here is the art museum, you know, had capacity through that period of time. The on-street, there may be a street or so that has exceeds functional capacity residentially, but not much there. And then there's an awful lot of off-street in the blue. As you can see, the churches, the voter hall lots, and so forth. So now let's shift to Saturday in September. You're going to see a very much of a change here. As you all know, this is something that you know anyway, that it's going to get much busier. When you shift to Saturday, you see a lot more red, okay? I'll go back to weekday again. Weekday, okay, and then you watch it turn to red, a lot goes to red. The art museum, a lot goes to red. Much of the, almost the entire 2-hour zone goes to red. And now you've got residential streets going to red. So you've got a much different condition on Saturdays. This is very, very, very typical all the way up the coast of New England for coastal communities. What's interesting here is that you still have a fair amount of availability in the church lots, the voter hall lots, even in the Union Baptist Church lot, which was just over 60% use. So you have availability in that large lot. So, and some other lots that happen to be roped off or closed. So what we see here at 4 o'clock, which is the peak here, again, 2, 4, and 6 very close, right? The afternoon is similar. But 73.5% overall use, that's pretty high because that includes the public and the private. So if it was 73.5% on all the streets, we would be done. We wouldn't need a parking study, but it's not evenly distributed, right? You have disbalance. So we'll get back to this in later slides. I went back in November again and looked at the parking, very busy here in November, weekday and Saturday. We did our license plate survey. We wanted to see how the two-hour zone was turning over, what the compliance was. What we found very interesting, approximately 1 in 4 vehicles, if you look down at, were in the 2-hour zone, they're parked in excess of 2 hours. So 23.5%. We like to see that under 10%. So that we're efficiently turning over parking. We have a good number of people who are not obeying that 2-hour limit. In the 4-hour segment, we had 1 in 7 vehicles. Why do we count the 4-hour? We like to see 4-hour. Typically, when you see people parking over that amount of time, they often are employees, sometimes downtown business owners, and occasionally maybe a resident or two. So we benchmarked that as well. So what are some of our findings? I want to focus mainly on utilization because that's what's going to drive much of what we do. We looked at all of these items in the study report, and starting with the inventory and our regulations, what did we find? Some of this is very obvious to some of you, but it's important to note that the off-street parking supply serving Mystic is almost 100% privately owned and controlled. This is very unique. I love to come into new areas because I see studies all the time and see things that I haven't seen. And this is one where Mystic's almost their entire supply is private. 20, 30 years ago, we would always say, but rule of thumb, we like to see 50% of the supply to be publicly owned and managed so that you have control over that system and you can force shared parking. As parking downtowns have privatized, that's kind of changed a little bit. But this is a unique challenge in that you have that 100%. Okay, so because the private suppliers don't necessarily have to play by your rules, they can set their own rates, regulations, and in fact, they can develop those lots at some point that can be a threat to the downtown. So that's number one. The 210 space art museum lot's a primary source of off-street public parking downtown. So that's obviously a very important asset to the downtown. The art museum lot charges market rates for their hourly and daily parking. When I say market rates, that means competitive rates that we see, parking rates for downtowns throughout New England. But at the same time, the most convenient space that you own, the most valuable space that you own is the on-street curb space, that commercial district space. Why? Because it's right outside the store. It's literally the most convenient space in the downtown for that function. And for that function, it's free. And so what the rates are disparate. You're moving people, they've got an incentive to move people from the off-street lot to the on-street. Let's go to the next one here. The number of designated 2-hour spaces downtown, 125 in the commercial, that's relatively small when I compare that to other small coastal communities in New England. The reason being largely is because you don't have a lot of side street action off of Route 1, Water Street. Pretty much your 2-hour zone is right in front of the stores for the most part, and it doesn't extend too far beyond that. Most of the on-street supply within a 5-minute walk of the commercial district is unrestricted parking on residential streets. That too is a little bit different than a lot of places. Some places have commercial space that isn't well used, and so it's unregulated all day free parking, and you get some parking there. Here, when you get outside of the 2-hour zone, a little bit out of the 2-hour zone, there's not a whole lot other than residential street parking for street work. Parking regulatory signs I found were generally in good condition, so kudos to Public Works, well located, I thought, in good condition. Parking wayfinding signage to and from your main supply, the art museum lot, not so good. Getting people there, and even when they're in the lot, there's a lot of, especially if you're from out of town, do I take a right, do I take a left, can I park behind some of these buildings? There's a lot of uncertainty. So wayfinding signage should go a long way, I think, to reducing what was one of the #1 complaints, or I don't say complaints, but concerns of the stakeholders, which is traffic downtown. And if that's something that we want to really do something about, this would be a step in the right direction. As far as the use of parking goes, we look at seasonality. It's very important seasonality. A regular downtown in a not on the coast, not a tourist area where you have regular use, it can be very non-seasonal. Here we do have seasonality. As I said, July and August is your peak season. Shoulder season is still very busy. I went back in November, extremely high. Still very good use on those good weather days in November. Many of my clients would be jealous, I think, of Mystic in terms of being able to generate that kind of parking demand. So that's a good thing, economic development and so forth, but it does show that you've got some year-round issues. Now, weekday use from a weekday, we kind of already gone through that. I'll go through quickly. Peak being at 2 p.m. on that September, that we had sufficient parking availability in the Art Museum lot right through the day, right? Most private parking lots were underutilized at that time as well. Only one residential street exceeded functional capacity, Pearl Street, on that weekday. Not to say that another street wouldn't pop up on another hour or another day, but one street in the peak hour, not bad. The entire 2-hour zone exceeded functional capacity, which was the main issue. The 2-hour zone is at 87.5%. That's the entire zone during the weekday. And on November 5th, when we went back, we found similar condition on many of the street segments. Saturday use, as we said, very different. Again, much higher use overall. The Art Museum lot exceeded 100% capacity, was temporarily closed for 8 hours, noon to 8. So a major closure there. And when I went back in November, it was 1 to 4 close. So that was noted. The Art Museum lot routinely exceeds capacity through the summer. That would include weekdays as well, and non-summer weekend nights. No surprise to you, and that was per the Art Museum staff. We didn't count that. The entire 2-hour zone exceeded functional capacity on that weekend day, that Saturday in September. 94.8% is extremely high. I will tell you, when you get to that level of capacity, that means that there's a car waiting for the car that's pulling out, so the new car pulls in, when you typically get into the mid-90s, okay? Several residential streets in both towns exceeded functional capacity during the Saturday peak period. And while the Art Museum lot was full, as I said earlier, there was still, even though that was full, the 2-hour zone's full, we have residential street, we still had churches with availability. We had private lots, we had the voter hall lots, and we had plenty of lots that we either roped off or just empty. And those empty lots might be like office use type or medical use. On-street time zone compliance, as we said, very high in those 2-hour spaces, which negatively impacts retail sales. And very briefly on this, what I like to tell retailers about the importance of turning that 2-hour over is, right now you have 125 spaces downtown, 2-hour spaces. If those turn six times during the day, you're effectively creating 750 spaces for parking sessions. When they don't turn over, when you allow an employee gets in there and you get 3 turns a day, that goes down to 375. You've lost 375 effective parking spaces downtown, which you can't afford to do. Now, a lot of those customers will just, because the employees get the spaces first, right, early in the morning, those customers will go into the residential neighborhood, they'll find a space, right? Some of them, though, won't. They'll just keep going. And those are discretionary trips that we see. We have done studies on them to see what the level is. But the unfortunate thing for retailers is they don't know which sales that they're missing, when that happens. So real importance on time zone turnover. Okay, as I say, a significant number of employees appear to be displacing those retail customers. And the lack of available convenient short-term parking contributes to congestion. As we said, the circling, the hunting, the looking, adds to that traffic, and especially residential. Let's look at employee long-term parking. The Mystic Art Museum has a freeze on their monthly park sales. They have a parking sale. They're really actually annual passes. I say monthly, but they're annuals. There's an estimated 320 of them in circulation. Not all of them are being used, but there's 320. There's a waiting list of over approximately 300. Individual employees are ineligible to purchase monthly passes at the Art Museum lot if their employer happens to be on the lot or has an agreement through the Art Museum, then they can park. But individuals are kind of out in the cold on that. So that's what I'm sort of saying in this last bullet. If they don't have that, really the options for the employees is the 2-hour zone on some nearby residential streets, or parking in a private lot sometimes without the consent of lot owners. So what's our recommendations to address? I think first and foremost, as you can see, the one constant through this is the 2-hour zone. And that isn't just a seasonal issue, isn't just a Saturday issue. That's an issue that goes throughout the year and on days. So we would say to meter and expand the 2-hour parking zone year round. And what that really does for you is it increases the availability of the turnover and your zone compliance. It really creates more effective parking supply. It helps to do that. It moves employees out of these spaces, and it moves many more customers back in. So, you know, if you're moving 20 or 25 employees out, you're going to move in many more customers, assuming that we're able to get that turnover. Okay. So that's what I just said. And then reduce the cost of time zone parking enforcement. Why? Because without meters themselves are self-enforcing. People, when they have a time cost to the time on that parking, they tend to move voluntarily, I should say. So it's much more self-enforcing. To chalk tires, to physically write down license plates, you need an army of enforcement officers to do that, and most towns can't keep up without it. And that's why almost all my clients up and down the East Coast have metered parking. You know, it's very rare not to. So in the time zone. So it will also balance on-street and off-street parking pricing. You won't have that $5 an hour to park in the lot and free right outside in the more convenient space. We'll start to balance the supply better. And important is to generate revenue source to expand off-street parking and reinvest in the downtown. Most of my clients, they use this meter revenue to pump back into the downtown. And that can be, you know, securing shared lot agreements, leased agreements for parking. It can be building parking lots. It can be expanding transit, expanding biking and walking and pedestrians and sidewalks and lighting that gets you to those parking spaces. So this is very important revenue that can't be generated in most cases any other way, but the general fund, which is a no-no. So it's a user fee. So we'll get back to that. If we do meter, we typically use today kiosk parking. The single space meters are much more expensive and can be unsightly. In this case, if we use kiosk parking, we'd also go with a mobile app, a payment app where you could pay by phone with your license plate and a credit card. Very simple to use. You've probably done it in other communities. There's also an opportunity to expand our 2-hour parking zone. Some of the side streets I'm showing here, Gravel Street and Groton, but these are employees very early in the morning before really things get going, and they've already taken all of these spaces here. So there's opportunity sort of on the side streets to be able, not a huge amount, but there's an opportunity to expand a little bit. I list East Main Street in Stonington as a possibility to expand that 2-hour zone down closer toward the churches. You know, you got Pearl Street and Gravel Street as examples. There's some opportunity. I'm also showing in the photo up to the right the striping of the stalled spaces. It's a bit inefficient. It's inefficient because you have small vehicles like that don't take up the whole stall. So a lot of my clients have now, when they go to the metered parking, they eliminate parking striping the parking stalls. What they do stripe is where you can't park. Corner clearances, distances from crosswalks and fire hydrants. Ends up a lot of times being a lot less painting. And the plus is you typically gain in the neighborhood of 10% or more of parking downtown on those, what I just called earlier, your most valuable spaces, because people will more efficiently park. Recommending to expand seasonal parking enforcement year-round, showing a parking ambassador, I think you call them community service officers. These folks do an invaluable service to downtown. They are, I think you've got them now on both sides of the bridge, or the ability to hire them. I know they've been in Stonington for some time, but they perform a very valuable function that it goes well beyond just enforcing parking. In other communities, you're doing it there, customer assistance, information, customer service, really. But things like truck delivery management, we've used them to, a single truck parked on the wrong corner can mess up the downtown all day long. It can push traffic. It can create unsafe conditions. We've used CSOs to help manage that, to move somebody off who's doing something that isn't right. You'd use them for special event parking. There's just a whole host of things, and I'd recommend going year-round with that. We'd replace their manual, right now, manual or handwritten tickets and handwritten enforcement of the 2-hour zone, and move to electronic wireless chalking and ticketing devices, which is really the state of the practice right now across the US. And it's just much more efficient. They can scan plates, they can move very quickly and do their job. Recommending expanding off-street public parking. The Art Museum lot has engineered plans on record here that does away with a couple of redundant aisles that they have in there and expands parking really largely by using paint, but there is some little bit of additional pavement in there that could increase the lot by 35 spaces. That would be very, very inexpensive relative to creating those 35 spaces anywhere else. So encourage the Art Museum lot to proceed with that improvement. And the 4th District Voting Hall lot, that has been engineered by the town, and I believe it's been bid out. I'll defer to Danielle, but 23 new parking spaces within the 5-minute zone, very much needed downtown. We can also expand off-street public parking in other ways. I'm showing here some lots. These are Saturdays that I'm showing you in the peak time. And it is Saturday peak, these are underutilized or empty. Now, I'm not, the churches have a lot of functions, and we have to be cognizant of the parishioners and all that goes on there. So there may be limited times in some cases, but there's also a lot of times where there's availability. The marina lots, and certainly a lot of lots where people don't feel like they can go in and use them. These are lots that might be busy Monday through Friday, but on Saturday are empty, the business office lots. So we should seek to secure shared lot agreements with these owners in the 5- and 10-minute walk zone. We've talked to a number of them. We've talked to the churches, talked to the marina lots. There's interest in participating, and they want to be good community partners, work with the towns. Sometimes this is as simple as plowing the lots, and they allow the communities to use them. I've worked out a number of these agreements in other communities. We do have to handle things like insurance and indemnification, all those types of difficult issues, but this is done all over the place. It's nothing unusual about it, and it's something that we should be pursuing, and we are pursuing, I will say. But also looking for lease and purchase opportunities for our lots in the 5- and 10-minute walks. Sometimes, and I did this when I was a parking director, unfortunately use them as land banks, until they're ready to develop or do. Maybe we use those as surface parking. To see them empty is difficult when you have so much use downtown. So looking to lease and purchase, and again, the revenue from those meters helps us do that, helps us expand that parking to lease and purchase. I do know there's a lot downtown. I think it's on Pearl Street in Groton that a private businessman's come in and said, well, I can provide general use public parking for a fee, and he's pursuing that project. So there is a market for it. When the private sector jumps in, there's a market for it. There's a need for it, and that's an opportunity. We'd also want to establish an employee permit parking program. Once we establish that we have some shared lot agreements in the churches or beyond the 4th District Voting Hall and other lots, we'd like to have the employees be able to park in there with a permit, particularly in the 5-minute zone. And what that does, it will accommodate employees who are currently parking in the 2-hour zone. We'll have a place for them to go, not just onto the residential street. Let's get them into the 2-hour zone. Get them out of the 2-hour zone. It'll increase parking turnover in the 2-hour zone. By doing that, it will reduce the waiting list for monthly parking at the Art Museum lot. In fact, some employees may come out of the Art Museum lot and use some of these spaces as a lower cost. We're creating economic choice, which is always a good thing. And so, as I say, employee permits should be priced lower than the monthly pass because the Art Museum lot is central. It's right in the heart, and some of these lots are going to be a little bit of a walk, not much, but a little bit more of a walk-in. I think we should establish a valet parking program in Mystic, and that means really outreach with your restaurant. Find ways to implement. This is done all over as well. Here, what we're talking about doing is freeing up parking in the 5-minute walk zone, particularly on busy weekend days and evenings. So instead of having those cars park in your 5-minute zone where you don't have a lot of space, The valet secures lots outside the 5-minute zones, parks those cars in tandem. If you look at the photo to the right and the bottom, those are tandem parking, and gets many more cars in those lots. So it's a win-win because you're moving cars out of the downtown, you're freeing up spaces in the 5-minute zone, you're using lots in the 10-minute zone that aren't being used. You are achieving a 50% increase in those lots because you're using tandem parking, and you're increasing customer service to the person who's getting door-to-door service. It's a win all the way around. When I was in Evanston, we made the city used the revenues from this program to also do other things for the downtown. So it's just a win all the way around. The towns typically license, regulate, and promote it. Okay. Recommendation is to protect the residential neighborhoods from excessive downtown parking infiltration and spillover. Now, all the things that we've kind of talked about so far will do that. I mean, if we meter, a lot of people say, well, you're going to move the employees out of the meter zone into the residential area. Yeah, but we're going to move a lot of the residents, the customers, back into the 2-hour zone. And there's many more of them than on the employee side who are currently in the 2-hour zone. So that's a plus. The creation of the employee permit and those off-street lots will take people out. We need to continue to do that, okay? But even with that, all towns that have active parking management programs, they monitor their residential districts. And they do that in case they need more regulation. So after you install the meters, after you've got the employee permit, go back into those residential neighborhoods, look at the occupancy, and we particularly like to look at those residential streets that are located between the commercial district and the employee permit lots that we're creating, and see what the occupancy levels are there. If they have a lot of multifamily housing or a lack of driveways, that may be an issue for regulation. If they're consistently exceeding 85% occupancy over multiple hours a day, that's an issue for potential regulation. So I want to leave it there that we need to continue to monitor and work with the residents. So the recommendations also here looking to implement strategies that address, we talked a lot about through the year, weekdays and Saturdays, but the summer condition, and I say the summer and special event, summer is a special event in coastal communities in New England. It operates like a special event. You have everyone coming. And so I like to treat it that way. And so in the summers, we're not looking just in the 5-minute zone. Of course, we're looking in the 10-minute zone because we have parking there now. And so some of the recommendations, again, back to the valet program all day long. That's something that we do, working in some of the projects in Newport when we were looking in Newport, Rhode Island at some of their event parking. Valet is a big part of that, bringing people from remote lots in during special events. Expanding peripheral free off-street parking within a 10-minute walk zone. So I talked about securing those lots in the 5-minute zone. We also need them in the 10-minute zone, whether that's space behind the fire station in Stonington. We've had a lot of people say, well, this Acme Wire has space. So there's a lot of lots that may be available and owners that may be willing to provide that. I mean, quite frankly, the Seaport Museum is only probably a 12-minute walk to the drawbridge. So on these weekend days, and they're considering providing for not free downtown parking, but downtown parking. So there's availability out there. We need to secure those peripheral free lots when we can. Some communities are implementing parking guidance systems with real-time dynamic messaging. This is to direct drivers to those peripheral lots when the art museum lot is full and closed. We do that with a lot of parking garages downtown when they fill. We have an electronic board that tells people to go to a peripheral lot. It directs them into that, and that's electronic board. It can be very, very effective. Like, we don't want to bring the whole world down to the art museum lot when there's no spaces. Right. And, implementing a shuttle bus system. This is something that Mystic has historic experience with. Shuttle bus systems can be very efficient and effective. They are not going to satisfy the demand for the bulk of your parking. However, that being said, I like to say these shuttles, if they can be fast, free, and fun, you can bring them down very quickly into the downtown area. You can link your remote lots, we talk about out at I-95, and all the way in with the hotels where people don't necessarily need to bring those cars in. With the attractions along the way, we mentioned the museum, the Mystic train station, of course, where people are coming in, and then into downtown. So we did this in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We did it on the back of a small federal grant, and then it went off on its own. It became the backbone, this shuttle, for expanding our fixed route service, which right now there's not a lot of transit in downtown Mystic. So this is an important thing. It's a long-term effort. I think your regional transit provider is very interested. So there's a groundswell of potential to make that happen. So John, with that, I think I would, that concludes, there's much more in the report. I can't cover everything in 30, 40 minutes here, but with that, I guess I'd open it up for any questions or comments.
Yeah. Thank you very much, John. So let's see, we have a Q&A tab that people can click some questions and put them out there. So there's a number of questions that were received so far and or some just general statements. I know one that we had talked about initially, John, was, you know, this study was done during COVID and a lot of places were closed or some places were closed around town. And what were your thoughts about that? You know, one of the things that we had seen was that the business impact in Mystic was not really absolute, like a light switch. There were a number of restaurants and other businesses that were closed during some of the off season, but, you know, mostly open in the late summer, early fall, except some of those indoor restaurants. But, you know, we had seen Mystic still busy, and it attracted a lot of visitors since it offered the outdoor opportunities that a lot of indoor places didn't. So we still did see that. And, you know, we were actually getting a lot of complaints or concerns from people about how busy Mystic was, you know, and the town had directional signage put up so people would walk in one direction to try to utilize the 6-foot distancing. But, you know, along those lines, what were the kind of numbers you saw? And do you think, you know, you've been to Mystic pre-COVID, you know, just some of the numbers, traffic, and how does that impact these study numbers?
Yeah, I think the key is good weather day versus bad weather day, or even medium weather day. All of the 4 days we were there in September, November were sunny and seasonably warm. Okay, so these are days that you would want to be outside. My guess is there was actually more people downtown on those days. I think there was in a lot of my clients on the coast here, people just wanted to get out. People wanted to be out. They want to be. So I think to the comment, I think on it might be the opposite on bad weather days. You might have much less use on the bad weather days, but on the good weather days, this might actually be a bump higher than what you're normally seeing. And that's kind of, and people are kind of reporting on that right now, as even in May here, as coming back, we're seeing big bumps of people. You know, just a pent up demand, just like the travel industry, to get outside. So I think these are probably a pretty good numbers in terms of the good weather day. Yeah.
Thanks, John. You know, we had a question about how do we reach out to some of the business owners and within downtown Mystic. We reached out to the committee members. We were looking for recommendations and guidance, and anybody that really wanted to give us some input on this, we're open to that level of input. We also had someone reach out just saying that, more making a comment that, you know, rather than directed in and out of use of spaces, they felt the predominant draw in Mystic is restaurant use, which usually leads to strolling around, that 2 hours is not enough and 4 hours might be a little too low of a limit for this typical type of visit. John, what's your thought on?
Well, you know, and that's a very good comment. That's a very good comment. And that's something, you know, we continue to monitor spaces. I have areas where we're going from 2 hours to 3 hours in the zone. We start to look at that turnover and how long, we call it duration of stay. How long are people staying in those zones? So, you know, that is something for the community to consider, going from 2 to 3 hours. We don't like to see 4 on the street, because 4 on the street, typically your employee will go out, park 4 hours, pay the meter, go to lunch, come back and park for 4 hours. So that kind of defeats the purpose. But off street, really, what's unique about Mystic is that you have a lot of short-term parking going on in the lots. typically your lots is for those 3, 4, the strolling for restaurants, right? And your on-street is really for the shorter duration, 2 to 3 maybe. So I would say that's something to watch. And I do think you're going to, if you start to meet at the 2-hour zone, you're going to draw some people out of the art museum lot back onto the street, free up more space in there for the longer term.
Couple of kind of quick ones. These slides will be available on the town's webpage tomorrow morning. We will also be posting up the town's draft report as part of this project on the town's both Groton and Stonington web pages. Hope to get those both posted up tomorrow. Someone had asked a question about when the traffic counts were done, September and November of 2019, or was that of 2020? We started this project in 2020. So those were done during COVID, and those numbers were still as high as they were.
Yep.
Let's see. So someone had put out here, dual-sided parking like on Pearl Street also affects traffic. Doesn't that also affect traffic flow and compound the parking issue? What are your thoughts on that, John?
I think, you have to have your street widths. But Pearl Street, I think, can accept parking on both sides of the street and still has the adequate lane width. So I think what they're probably referring to is people parallel parking, and that sometimes you have to wait for that person to park, but that's pretty well true in all downtowns.
Another comment from someone that, Mystic was approximately a normal census. What wasn't represented were, the normal foreign travelers that might not have vehicles or might not have normally been here, and a near absence of tour buses, which we didn't really see. And they drop off and load a lot of people, foot traffic in the area, and just kind of circling through. Have a question about the residential parking stickers in areas where none or few driveways. That was something we knew would come up through this.
And what's the question, John, about it?
It was just, what about residential parking stickers in areas where there are none or few driveways?
So, it is done in other communities. It's something that, like you looked at as we presented, the weekdays, for 8 months of the year, for all intents and purposes, they seem to do quite well. You want to keep monitoring that, but there really wasn't much in the neighborhoods there was one street, I think Pearl Street, that showed itself at capacity. But in the off season, there are also communities that do residential permit just in the summer when it's super busy. I think what we want to do is make sure that we're implementing some of these recommendations that are synergistic, right? Getting employees into lots, getting turnover in the on-street zone, getting valet in place potentially, getting more lots online, and see how that affects residential parking. You may find it much better. But of course, that's an option always. Some communities decide to, allow residents to park in the employee lot with a permit before they do on-street residents. So there's a whole tool bag, and it is something to consider and monitor for sure.
Okay. Another question came up, what will the parking impact be if the Mystic Oral School property is developed at the intensity that it is? John, how do you see areas like this change or get impacted by traffic for larger developments that happen, a couple miles away?
Yeah. I think with that, and I know the planning that's going along with it, and the biking aspect of that is very important, of course. People sometimes, you have to have a place for people to store the bikes. We need to look at that. But traffic is an issue for the downtown, and I think some folks have said, well, why don't we just scrap all this stuff and build a garage on the art museum lot, and just take care of it. The key challenge I see for my clients is a lot of them have already built those things right in the heart of the downtown, large facilities. And they're now on the opposite side saying, wow, we're inviting the world into our downtown, and it's unattainable for pedestrians. It's no longer fun to be on a bike. I think the challenge for Mystic is how do we bring people in, maybe before they get into the dense urban part of the downtown. And when they do get in, can we have them park once? can we keep them on their feet so they're not doing multiple trips? So, I mean, that's going to be the challenge going forward for development outside. And again, back to the peripheral lots, building a transit system on the back end of a trolley. These are things that we need to start to look for the future, I would say.
Okay, good. We have a question. What about Gravel Street? We have asked for 2-hour parking to avoid cars parking all day in front of our homes, whether employees from town, tourists, Airbnb. Even if there is excess parking downtown, people like to park on gravel as it's scenic. It's fine, but there should be some turnover, such as downtowns. What are the thoughts about Gravel Street?
Yeah, I mean, and when I showed Gravel Street for 2 hour, that's a very short extension of the 2 hour. I mean, that's not going by much farther than the church and the insurance agency. I mean, it's just 6 or 7 spaces there. We're not going into the residential with 2 hour parking there. So necessarily, but so that I hear you, and that really shouldn't be a concern for that 2 hour.
And I think some of that question might actually be maybe extending the, okay. So would signage at the 2-hour kiosks have advertising to directing people to those longer term parking availability areas? Thinking a little bit at some of our parking wayfinding signage. How do you usually handle that, John?
Well, I still in this day and age, most people use their phones and they put in the lots, right? So, I mean, having a web page, as you grow your parking, you'll have a web page, you'll show available parking. People will find the lot, they'll put it in their phone and they'll drive to it. They drive to the address. Even with that, the wayfinding goes a long way. So as you're coming in from 95, you want to hit them early and often. And that's why I said the PGS is nice, because we're moving to electronic signs where, okay, I don't want to send them to the art center lot if it's full. I want to have a peripheral lot to send them to, and that's where it's moving. So.
Okay. And John, you had touched on this a little bit, but maybe we can take a little bit of a deeper dive. Someone had asked thoughts on a possible parking garage above or underground if possible. And I know this question has come up for a long time. A lot of folks have often said, why don't we just build a parking garage and manage it? And I know you have some really strong thoughts on that, or just, a lot of good data. And I think the first step, as we look at many of these things, is there's a lot of other low-hanging fruit we can address first. There's a lot of things we can do through the management of parking. And, especially if we have a lot of free parking and undefined areas of where people are parking, why are they going to go paid a lot? I mean, that almost seems really as something to first address. And I think you had brought up before that first we start going after all these areas within the 5-minute zone, within the 10-minute zone. We manage this stuff. We try to come up with a program. And then if parking still is a real issue, all right, how do we deal with it during those peak months? Because, nowadays, what's the cost of a parking spot right now in a structure? About $45,000 per spot.
It can range from 35, 45, right up there, depending if it's in a historic district or on the water or something like that. Yeah, for sure. I would say, most of my clients now are telling me, John, how can I go forward without building a garage? Because most of the communities that I work with on the coast are saying, well, we don't want that we don't want that mass in our downtown. And not only that, if you have a lot of available still parking in the 5 and 10-minute zone, even if it's private parking that could become public, you'll open the garage and folks will go there first. They're not going to pay a premium. The average municipal monthly parking pass is $100. For I would say for small, medium-sized cities. So before they pay that $100, they're going to go, they're going to use the available parking in the walking distance. So yes, towns really, we aren't actively managing parking right now in Mystic. The first thing you want to do is actively manage it. Use what you have. I helped the town of Plymouth, the city of Newburyport. Try to use everything you have. Look at the shared lots, do those things. And then after you've done that and you've used the lots, all the space in the 5 and 10-minute zones, then they built their first parking garage, and they're small. in both communities I'm talking about. So, and those are much larger communities than Mystic here. So it is something, it makes sense. You can see in the off season that during the weekday, you don't really have much of a parking problem. So all those months that garage might be very underutilized, it becomes very, very costly to the town to operate that.
All right, thank you. Someone had asked, will the video be available on YouTube? Yes, it's streaming right now on YouTube. It'll be up on GMTV after this, so we can share the data, the question and answers. Again, this presentation will be available on the town webpage tomorrow, or the town's web pages tomorrow or shortly thereafter, as well as that final report. And again, this is the beginning of a conversation on this topic. These are recommendations that are coming from John, working with this group and trying to get some feedback from the businesses as well as residents and others that are frequenting downtown Mystic. Some of this stuff is going to take some time and is going to cost some money to implement. So, there's going to be more of a community conversation to be moving these things forward. John, another question that came up, do you have any problems with the electronic ticketing and people questioning it? Or any pushback on some of that?
No, not that I'm aware of anything with the electronic ticketing. It's now the basis of that is that you can see in real time who's parked over 2 hours. You can get an alert on your smartphone. Okay, these 4 cars out of the 10 have parked over. So it just becomes just a really valuable tool to do directed enforcement much more efficiently than done by hand, obviously.
Okay. Someone had asked about when renovations or new buildings, expansions are done in downtown Mystic. I think this might be a little bit more of a Groton specific question. When parking is required by zoning, don't some places buy parking spots from the museum or participate in the validation program? That is something that is available. That is something I know the town has been a little bit concerned about because there are a lot of businesses that have contributed or participated in that over time. And our Planning and Zoning Commission has certainly brought up some of their concerns about the utilization of that validation program, how many businesses are doing it, how many participating, and at some point in time, that's going to get maxed out. And, again, that was something of one of the many reasons of the why are we doing the study, so we can get a better handle on how many people are using that type of program, as well as where is the parking and how can we better manage it in downtown. Mm-hmm. Question, were the spaces that were technically in no parking zones that are parked and counted as part of this, and how could those be enforced?
Cars were counted in no parking zones. If they were parked in a no parking zone, they were counted. So you might get a street that was 109% occupied. That means someone was parked illegally. It's over the actual 100% of the spaces. So we did count if it was illegally parked. We counted it as a car on that street. Yes.
Okay. Next question. I think a few of these items, it might be more data is needed, but I'll just kind of put the statement. This data is fantastic. The two towns working together, fantastic. How much does the museum parking lot generate? It's a private entity. I don't have those exact numbers. What zoning changes are needed for complacency? Guess on how many employees, how many needed for offset of employee parking permit, and who decides who gets how many per business. Again, those are all part, I think, of a future conversation of how do we deal with employee parking permits, employee validation. John, how have you seen those types of things work?
In most communities, the employee individual buys the permit. Businesses can buy the permits for their employees as well, but a single permit goes to a single employee's license plate. That's how it's tracked. So it's typically the individual who buys that permit, and in the off-street lots, yeah.
Okay. So Danielle, this might be a question a little bit more for you dealing with Stonington. The majority of hotels are on the Stonington side of Mystic, while the majority of the restaurants are on the Groton side of the river. Are the hotels and restaurants encouraged to shuttle patrons to restaurants using discounts or vouchers? Is that something, Stonington's been considering or talking to any of the hotels about?
John, feel free to jump in here, Burke, if you spoke with any, but I think it's something that we would absolutely consider engaging the hotels on. It's not something that's done extensively to any of our knowledge, but it's definitely something that we would be happy to reach out to some of the hotels as part of this to chat about it. But John, Burke, I'm not sure if you have any more to add to that.
And did you say John Burke or John?
Yeah, Burke, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so first of all, I should have addressed that at the very outset of this. You know, one of the very confusing things about this project, so the town manager in Groton's name is John Burke, and our parking consultant is John Burke. So many times, you know, we get 3 Johns working on this thing. It became a real disaster. Yeah. Anyway, so this was a John Burke question.
Yes, I think it's a great idea. I wrote it down. I think it's an excellent idea. And again, I think if the towns can proactively, aggressively go after shared lot agreements, you know, and then work with the restaurants, hotel, whoever, to have employees go to. Sometimes these parking lots will be very close to them. You know, I went on Outer Washington Street, and there was 3 empty parking lots on Outer Washington Street. That the only reason they were empty on a Saturday is because Monday through Friday is the business. You know, so there are opportunities. I think it's a wonderful idea, and that's the reason we really need to be going out there and trying to work with the businesses who have those lots.
Yeah, and we on the Groton side of things have been talking to some of those large lot owners, thinking about some type of, you know, shared lot agreements and other things. So those conversations have been started. See, we had a question. So does that mean we can have 2-hour parking signs on all of Gravel Street? You know, I think that's something that the town can look at and consider.
Yeah, I mean, John, it is absolutely a possibility. That wouldn't be something that you would do wholesale. You'd want to do with the residents there. But yeah, absolutely, that's a possibility. If it's within a very short walk of the commercial district, it would get well used, I'm sure.
This one might be another Danielle question. You know, many residents are hopeful that the town boat launch ramp at Isham Street will be rebuilt. When this occurs, where will users be able to park trailers if not at the voting hall?
Yeah, so we've shared, this is a complicated topic, but essentially the Isham Street boat ramp was never an official boat ramp, is what we discovered. It's not even officially owned by anyone. It's not the seaport, and the town has no records of it, and DEEP has no records of it. So to get it to be a working boat ramp would be a pretty heavy lift. And right now we're really focused on the Mystic River Boathouse Park just down the street, and that having a boat launch and location. So we'll probably be focused more of our energy there. Not to say that we can't revisit Isham Street at a future time, but for now we're really trying to focus energy just a little bit down the road there.
Okay. Let's see, we had one comment, you know, as a longtime Mystic resident, I've noticed an increase in traffic, which I presume is related to inadequate parking. I think seasonal meter parking and resident parking from May 1st to November 1st makes sense. Hopefully the meters can be removed during the off season, especially when the snow flies. I think, you know, one of the things that John was recommending for a lot of this was, John Burke, was that some of these meter stations, it's more the kiosk as opposed to a meter in front of each particular spot. You know, John, how do we deal with this during, you know, when we get those very snowy days that none of us are really thinking about too much on a day like today?
Yeah, with regard to snow, they do need to be cleared out, and so people can access them. That becomes a town by town issue. If it's a very heavy snow day, do you just bag them? They do come with bags. You can bag them. They're easy to move. So that becomes, you know, every town does it a little bit different on snow events. But as far as the seasonality goes, you know, you clearly have a very strong season. You got going into November. There are communities, and this again back to John's point about the implementation. There are a lot of decisions, and I probably should have prefaced the presentation that, you know, once you make a decision on the direction that you're moving, there's a lot of individual decisions. Just like, do you make the downtowns 2-hour or 3-hour? That really is town by town. It changes. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong. It kind of feeds what you have there. So there's a lot of decisions here, even with seasonal parking. You know, do you charge in December before the holidays? These are things that are done differently in other communities.
So, John, another question here, and maybe, so first, a compliment to you on a very thorough presentation, although I think we may have misunderstood the gravel street question. So I think this particular resident is saying we would like more regulation and parking enforcement on gravel street. By us enforcing 2-hour parking in the downtown district, we're then driving everybody into those other residential street with cars that prevent people from parking in front of their own homes, or sometimes maybe driveways get blocked. So, how do we deal with that?
With putting 2-hour zone into the residential area is what we're saying?
No, I think by enforcing the 2-hour in the real downtown area,
yeah,
we then going to push people further out into areas where there may not be 2-hour limitations.
Yes. This is a common misconception, and I get this in a lot of communities, that by metering you're going to move people out. What's happening here is you are not getting the turnover. With the enforcement, what we're trying to do is actually satisfy more customer trips downtown. So there's less customers going out into the neighborhoods. There's not an awful lot of employees in the 2-hour zone. I think it was 1 in 7. So if there's 20 employees going out, there's many more customers that we can bring back into the 2-hour zone by enforcing the 2-hour zone, I think, out of the neighborhood, because you're just not getting the turns right now.
I'm trying to interpret someone's question here. So someone had said, they feel that the turnaround from getting people outside drop-off spots and the kind of trolley system without creating major traffic jams is going to be very difficult, whether through a trolley, and then where would those traffic drop-off points be without causing major delays?
Yes, that's an excellent point. And that's to my fast, free, and fun. People don't need to be dropped right in front of, when I say in Plymouth, they don't have to drop people right in front of Plymouth Rock when we do a trolley there. They need to be in a reasonable walk of it. So we need to be able to get that trolley in, turned around, and back out where they can see all the fun that happens in Mystic, but they don't have to be actually in the drawbridge traffic. So that's going to be in the route design of that system.
Okay.
To make sure.
All right, good.
It's a good point.
Yeah. Someone asked, could lines be painted on Pearl Street to show how close to the curb a car must be? At present, it's very difficult to have 2 cars pass when there's full parking on the street. Most cars end up waiting in driveways to allow others to pass. Yeah.
In terms of, and I talked about not striping the parking stalls. Some communities allow people to get close to the curb, and most do a pretty good job of it. On narrower streets, like Water Street, they would actually provide them a box. They wouldn't put the stall spaces, but they would put the 2 line, the curb line, and then they would put a line parallel to the curb to try to get people to park closer, so that, especially on narrow streets. So that is an option for something like Water Street, where you could do that to just make sure people aren't pushing people into the other lane. I don't know if I answered that question, John, or that's
okay. No, that
seems
that hits it a little bit. Another person, some comment, parking is not the long-term solution. They think transportation is. Getting parking off-site by 95 with regular transport by bus, van, or water, similar to areas like Key West or Williamsburg, and paid parking downtown is not good or not needed.
I fully agree with that. You cannot build your way out of parking problems. I've seen communities try to do it. They get into the 2nd and 3rd parking garages. The traffic just goes up exponentially. It really, this is a great call to arms. It's a great opportunity to start the discussion on transit. Biking and walking are components of that, but it all starts with a backbone of mass transit. And you've got the train station, my goodness, and you've got 95 with a beautiful lot out there. So I think that's right on. I think that's a big part of the puzzle.
Okay. Another comment, in any given hour, there are 4+ hotel shuttles driving the streets in downtown. I think there are about 10 shuttles in downtown from different properties, from as far as Foxwoods to Mystic Marriott and Groton. Be nice to see if we can, migrate that to a single shuttle loop or get them to work together. Absolutely. Again, I think that gets into some of the management, some of those shared agreements. John, I think you might have touched on this. I had been emailed this question this morning. How will alternate modes of transportation factor into solutions? For example, how to reduce cars entering downtown Mystic by providing safe pedestrian and cycling routes?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time in Portsmouth. I go back to Portsmouth and thinking about how do we make parking areas further out from the core area of the downtown. How do we make those areas much more accessible and safe? And using a lot of your meter revenue to try to improve lighting out to those areas, and on the pedestrian end of things. Sidewalk connections, are there particular intersections as you move out that are daunting for pedestrians? They're too wide, or and slowly using funds to try to improve those, to get people to walk in, particularly from those areas. Biking, certainly, regional bike plan and making connections to Mystic should be a priority for sure.
Yeah. And there was another question that had come up that I'd sent you yesterday, John, about the multimodal transportation, and there are not really any incentives right now for people to not park and drive. Specifically what type of bike parking and moped parking could be developed, and how do we keep cyclists safe from not getting doored by cars, especially in areas, angled parking on Cottrell Street, or, pulling out of lots for people that don't see them. Yeah,
I do think is really more of a comprehensive bike plan, because, you really need to look at all the routes coming in and out. Where is the right location for racks? And, that really feeds the routes that you're going to really, push. How do you access those commercial areas without, as they say, running down Main Street? Could be very difficult. So it's an excellent point. And again, I think it would be part of a regional bike plan that would be tying into.
Good. One thing I didn't mention before, just the level of interest we have on this topic from both Groton and Stonington is fantastic. We've had during this over 70 people on the call was the highest number I saw just on this actual Zoom. And I know that there are a significant amount of people watching this live on YouTube because we had maxed out on our registration process too. Right now, there's still 59 people on the Zoom. So, thank you for everybody who is actively engaged in this topic and participating. We got a few more questions to go through. It's not shutting it down, but just wanted to kind of note how great it is, just the number of people really interested in this. Yeah. So another person brought up the question of short-term rentals, and do you have any suggestions for short-term rental parking regulations, or how have you seen that impacting some of these downtown areas, John?
I'm not following. Is that like an Airbnb or what?
So the short-term rentals, the Airbnb, the VRBO, and seeing some of these, what had historically been maybe single-family homes, occupied year-round, are now getting flipped around and turned into the short-term rental properties, where you're seeing a little bit more volume of people coming into districts that may or may not be as familiar with the historic patterns of how people are parking, right, where they can park. Have you seen any concerns in some of the other places?
Well, no, but strategies? We do factor it in when we look at residential permit parking, when that gets considered in the evolution of a downtown parking program. That would fall into the level of multifamily housing. I mean, if it's an Airbnb year-round and it's generating 5 cars for a single family house or something like that, that becomes part of the equation of and that will show in the numbers when you're monitoring those residential streets. Is it qualified for restriction for residential? So it does get accounted for.
Okay. Another, I think a recommendation from someone, suggestion, marked parking lines on Library Street. There must be 15 spots there that are hardly used. I think it was last week, John, we're out in Mystic and somebody had mentioned about the amount of parking up Library Street and we had noticed how little parking was happening up there.
Yes, it's an excellent point, and I've noted it, and we're going to include it. It's there are these in every city in town. There are these spaces that it just doesn't look like you can park there, or people just don't realize they're there. So I think we'll add that for sure. That's a good comment.
So a question, we need short-term and long-term plans. What is the short-term plan, the next 3 months? And then what is the longer term plan? So I'll take a little bit of a stab at that. And I don't know if Danielle or John want to jump in a little bit on this too, but first thing first, we got to take this back to the, respective towns and start talking about, with, the help of John Burke, what are some of those low-hanging fruit things that we can start implementing immediately. We are aware, I believe in both Groton and Stonington, police departments have community service officers that we're looking to have those positions around this summer. So that might be something looking a little bit more at enforcement and how we can get people to turn things over. I think some of those short-term parking areas that we're looking at, a lot of this is going to be a council discussion in Groton, and I'm sure there'll be some good discussion over in Stonington on some of these longer term. A lot of these issues, we're just going to keep picking away at them, especially these shared parking agreements. None of them are going to happen overnight, but it's something we know, on our side and in talking, with our colleagues in Stonington. This is a real issue. We want to keep allowing Mystic to thrive, and it's such a great place. We don't want it to turn into gridlock because we couldn't manage the parking or we didn't take an aggressive stance on that. So Danielle, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, not to put you in the hot seat too much.
No, you said it really well, third John. So no, I'd say any, Stonington residents or business owners who are listening, just, they can reach out to me in the First Selectman's office or our excellent team in planning. I know Sue Cullen has been on this call the whole time as well, and she's been an active participant. So we've heard from a lot of people, which we appreciate, but we'd love more feedback. And just like you said, John, we are actively talking with other potential business owners or people who might be able to help solve some of this, but new ideas are always great. And there's clearly, I'm sure, areas that we haven't looked at or explored yet. So we welcome any feedback.
John, if I could just mention one thing on the low hanging fruit. And I know that the towns are looking at the shared lots. We typically consider those, the churches, they absolutely need them on Sunday and other days as well sometimes, but the weekdays they can be available. So that typically is low hanging. Medical offices and law offices, button up their lots on the weekend. Offices, so those are low hanging fruit. Sometimes these agreements can be done with just plowing or just striping or paving every couple of years. So once those come into play, there's a lot you can do. It really frees things up when you start to get some of those empty lots full, and a lot of things will start to fall into place. Everything becomes easier.
Okay. And let's see, another question here. Won't you increase traffic and car counts by turning over on-street parking more frequently? So I'll take a quick stab at that, and then John Burke, if you want to jump on that too. So I think one of the problems we have right now is that, okay, I got to find that parking spot. So I'm going to drive around and I'm going to drive around. And I know all of us have lapped around Mystic a few times before looking for that parking spot. But if there is more turnover on those spots because it's paid, people can't park there all day for free. You're going to have less looping around looking for that free, awesome spot. And all right, this is just how it is. So if I
Yeah.
see a spot, I'm going to grab it. John, any more thought on that?
Yes, I would say there's a lot of studies on this. You guys can look up online. Some studies estimate 20 to 30% of that parking, of your downtown parking, are people circling looking for parking. The goal for downtowns needs to be to reduce the hunting and searching. So creating, as John says, creating availability through pricing is the way to do that. If I can go to a street and it's priced correctly, and there's always 1 or 2 spaces on that block face because it's priced correctly, and it's in balance with the off street, you're going to have a lot less people hunting through neighborhoods, especially people who don't know your downtown. They just try, they don't know where they're going. They may end up in the marina lot. They don't know where they are. So that's what we're trying to create, that availability to prevent.
Okay. A suggestion from someone, with the broad buffer zone on the west side of Allen Street connector for high volume events, could the town of Groton look to use this area for parking, because there's currently no parking signs there? I don't know if that's something that's ever been considered, but again, a suggestion that's there. Here's a question, John. Is there a rule of kind of a standard for how much is too much relative to size? When does more parking facilitate too many patrons to retain Mystic's small village nature?
Yeah, I think that's a community value discussion on development. Probably goes a little bit beyond the parking supply and demand issue.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll down on that one. That's different in every community. There's beautiful communities that have developed over the last 10, 20 years, and people feel it's too gentrified. It's changed the face. But that's individual, and that's a community value.
Yeah. No, and I think one of the tough things is if people really want to get to an area, they're going to get there, whether it's by a bike, whether it's by their foot, whether it's, it might not always be the safest measures, whether it's, okay, hey, somebody's driving and dropping us all off. Ubers, there's always going to be a workaround or some type of fix. And, one thing that we really didn't get into too much tonight is, as we're talking about parking, I know we've had a few folks in town talking about, well, what is the long-term impact in areas like Mystic of driverless cars? There's so many things that are changing with that. And right now, on both sides of the river, a significant amount of land area is covered with surface level parking. And that's something that could be more of a reality 10 years from now.
Yeah, John, I would add to that prior to the pandemic, and of course the pandemic brought a lot back of single occupant driving, right? The trends were going the other way. And so a lot of parking garages were being built to consider other uses. If it's a 40-year structure, they would build it such that it could be converted at some point when we didn't need the garage anymore to maybe an office building or a multi-use building, right? So this is a very recent thing where the pandemic has created a lot more car. People don't want to share rides, and I think it's actually the trend has been the opposite. Has been to more multi-use.
Okay. Someone had asked, can we have resident parking or short-term parking signs in residential streets happen now, since we're going into this peak season? I think one of the difficult things with that is it takes time to pass those ordinances, to go through that. And I think the short answer is not sure the timeline on how quickly any of these things can be done. And I know that in both towns, there's going to want to be a little bit more of a community conversation on things before stuff starts getting implemented.
John, I would add to that, if the focus can be, let's get the employees into these lots. Let's get the employees into these lots, and let's get the customers back into the 2-hour zone. And you may find things a whole lot better in the residential streets, right? So if we can draw those employees and those customers back to where they need to be, employees off street, customers back in the 2-hour zone, you're going to free up a lot of parking on the residential side. I would say if I were in control there, and I'm not, but if I was, that would be what I would focus on.
All right, so it is 7:26. We're hoping to wrap this up by 7:30. So spot on with the questions that came in. Not seeing any more questions pop up. So if you have a question, submit it now or just hold it until the next time we're all meeting together. I do want to thank everybody as part of this project, John Burke, John Burt, Danielle, both, the group of folks that really participated in this, our stakeholders group, the businesses that participated, as well as, both towns for setting aside the money to do this study. I think this was a really great project for us to work on. But again, this is kind of step one to happen. And now we have to start getting into the really hard part, implementing this stuff, because, having these studies, these conversations, that's part of it, but implementation takes time, takes a lot of effort and thought. And I think that's all I have. Getting a lot of thanks from people in the question area. John, was there anything else you wanted to offer before we close this out?
No. Thank you. This is a wonderful session. I appreciate all the input. I've taken a lot of notes here, so thank you very much.
All right, great. And again, we will have the final draft report of this project posted up hopefully tomorrow on both towns' web pages. We'll get this presentation out there as soon as possible. And stay tuned for more information getting out there through, the town council, through the town of Stonington, through the chamber, through the Mystic Merchants Association. A lot of folks have been involved in this. So, if you have questions, concerns as businesses, reach out to the chamber, to the Mystic Merchants Association. Residents, if you have questions, reach out to myself, reach out to Susan, reach out to Danielle, anybody on the staff in either of the towns. We certainly want to help and look forward to moving this conversation forward.
Great.
All right. Well, everyone have a great night. Hopefully you can get outside for a walk or something. Weather's still nice out, and we'll all be talking soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.